Committee members Hutchinson, Hintermeister,
Here.
Trash Scarfink,
Here.
Edgerton, Lovelace.
Present.
Okay, and Mr. Edgerton is here. Okay, and so the first item is a report of the chair, and want to introduce Edmund Sullivan. He's our new executive officer, and he was on the phone with us. Were you on the phone? No, at the implementation board. It was someone else then.
Someone else, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
And anyway, so if I could give the floor to Mr. Sullivan, and do you like Ed or Edmund?
Either's fine, yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll take turns introducing ourselves as the members talk themselves.
Sure. So just, thank you, Chairman. So just kind of a brief overview of where I came from and work experience.
Yes, sir.
And all that sort of stuff. So originally from upstate New York, moved to California 11 years ago. In New York, I worked for Niagara County Planning, worked in consulting, doing a lot of open space work, stuff related to farmland preservation. As a consultant, I worked on sort of more traditional planning stuff like open space plans and community development and Main Street improvements and all those sort of general plan updates that consultants do. So I moved out here, worked for Placer County for 11 years, worked for the Placer Legacy Open Space Program, worked on their HCP, NCCP, that 10 of those 11 years. Still not permitted like the one here. So my educational background, I went to the University of Wisconsin, and I have a master's in planning and conservation biology. It's a real honor to be here, and really looking forward to working with the PAC to assist with implementing the plan. I think this group here is a key cog in the implementation process. You represent the community, you represent various stakeholder groups, and it's important to get the feedback from both you as general public members and you as representatives of stakeholder groups as sort of a barometer of whether we're accomplishing the objectives of the plan. And getting feedback from this group is critical, I think, to effective implementation of the plan. Thank you.
And then all of us, ask each one of us to tell Ed basically how we view the organization and how we would like it to go forward. And Valerie, could you do more or less the same for us? And she is our new general counsel.
Certainly. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. My name is Valerie Armento. I have spent my entire legal career here in the San Francisco Bay Area as a municipal law attorney. I started out in the city of Fremont, then went to the city of Hayward. I became the city attorney of South San Francisco, and then I spent 14 years as the city attorney of Sunnyvale. I retired from Sunnyvale, and I continue to do various local government types of jobs. I've done some work with the Santa Clara Valley Water District and with the county of Santa Clara, as well as a number of different cities.
And did you also work with John Williams at Sunnyvale, or was he before you?
No, I don't recognize that name. Sorry.
No.
I have both a law degree and a master's of regional planning degree from Cornell University, which I went to from here. And I'm delighted to be in a position where I can actually use those two degrees in my work with the agency.
Well, welcome aboard for both of you. Under the report of the chair, I don't have anything new to report, but I am now a permanent item on the agenda for the Implementation and Governing Board. So if anyone has anything that they want raised at those 2 meetings and you don't want to go, let me know, and I'd be more than happy to accommodate. We had a relatively short meeting 2 weeks ago, and where Valerie was introduced as well. Are you folks okay with Ed and Valerie?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. Then if we could start from the right, Julie, if you could a little bit on, give them a thumbnail of who you are and where you see this going.
Okay. Hi, I'm Julie Hutchison. I'm a resident of Morgan Hill, but I'm also environmental advocate for the Committee for Green Foothills. Committee for Green Foothills was a stakeholder in this process from the very beginning. And I took over from Brian Schmidt, who was the original stakeholder for Committee for Green Foothills at the very ending. I welcome you both. It's my understanding from Ken that he's very pleased with the choices that were made. So that's exciting to hear. From my perspective, I guess you're looking for how really the greatest thing for us are two of the main issues that come as no surprise. One would be to ensure that the fee structure is holding up what will be the goals for implementation in the long run for acquisition and for species recovery. So those are two of the things we keep our eye on the most. And then from there, I think we'll sort of, I would say that past that, as we sort of from time to time not revise, but review the plan, see where changes may be necessary. That's, I think, also a big one for us. There's always new data that comes up, so it's a good opportunity to tweak the plan where necessary.
Thank you. Jan?
Hi, I'm Jan Hintermeister. I'm on the County Parks Commission, and as a result of that, I was asked to join the stakeholder group really near the start of this whole process. So I've been at almost all the stakeholder group meetings over the last 8 years or however long it's been. And I'm also on a member of the Open Space Authority's Citizen Advisory Council Committee. And as far as what we're doing here, just in general, I expect to, contribute, input as a member of the public. Also, to do things that may be tasked to us, by the governing bodies. But, in terms of my own general look at the Habitat Conservation Plan, the things I'm most concerned about are the burrowing and owl strategy, which is, to me, probably one of the most difficult things and one of the species that's really in the most trouble. So, just in general, to make sure that the conservation measures that are in the plan actually get implemented.
Thank you. Georgia?
I'm Georgia.
This is your first official meeting, although you did sit in the audience
yeah.
once before.
I'm relatively new to the board, so I can't really say for sure what it's all about. I have my feelings about what I'd like to see. And I believe in preservation, but I also believe that when you're spending taxpayers' dollars, that it should be accessible to the taxpayers. So I'm very interested in that aspect of it.
So preserving access to the properties, is that?
Yeah, having access. I mean, if we're buying up a lot of the land with taxpayer dollars, I think it should be accessible by the taxpayers. There are times, of course, I understand that it's going to be in fragile areas that you cannot allow people on for some reason or another. But I just think that as much access as possible to the taxpayers is good.
Thank you. Greg?
Hi, welcome to both of you. Glad to see we're actually have staff now and up and running. That's a good thing. I started with the Habitat Plan in October of 2005 when Don Gage made an announcement down at Guadalupe Park, and that was a culmination of quite a bit of effort prior to that. My job is I'm the executive director of the Silicon Valley Land Conservancy, and a lot of the initial mitigation, especially for the Bay checker spot butterfly, has gone to our organization. And so the habitat plan will probably either replace or we may be able to fit in there. I'm not exactly sure how. So that's my job, what I do for work. I'm here not representing that organization, but to represent generally the environmental community from whatever standpoint. The one thing that I do want to see, and the reason I bring this up is that I've seen other places where it wasn't, is this body being relatively irrelevant in the process. We don't have any voting authority. We're not elected by the public. We're just kind of here. So I'm going to be keeping a close eye and see if what we say and comments that we have has any impact, or whether it's just like kind of a nice thing to have. So that will be of interest to me. And also keeping an eye out for the operation of the plan from the environmental standpoint. Is it proceeding on target and that type of thing? So that's all.
Thank you. Joe?
Hi, my name is Joe Lovelace. I'm an electrician here in San Jose, and I just graduated from San Jose State back in December with a degree in environmental studies. And I became aware of the plan in 2010, just doing some research, looking for something to do a report on. And as I was reading the plan and attending some meetings, I discovered that there wasn't a lot of public involvement. Even in the process, there was a lot of stakeholder involvement. But as far as the general public, I saw that there was a sort of an element missing in the process, and I was critical of that in a couple of reports that I wrote, and then I became sort of committed to either becoming involved myself or making sure that there was some accessibility for the general public to this plan and to the process. We're talking about endangered species take and a fairly large preserve, and I wanted to be a part of that, so I put my name in the hat, and here I am. So I look forward to working with you, and I'm happy to be here and working with these people. So thank you. And thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. About the only thing I can add, and I agree with everything everyone has said, but one thing that Joe has brought up several times, that we are advocates for the environment. We are advocates for the Habitat Agency. And so we're looking for ways that we can become more involved and reach out to groups, community groups, anyone who, that we can go and make sure that our voice is heard. And I do have one question with Georgia, and I'm not certain myself, but are we that much taxpayer funded, or are we developer funded and government?
Well, true enough, yeah.
Right.
It is mostly. But do keep in mind that the people who buy the houses are paying the bill, because it increases the cost of the property. So I just thought that, my understanding was this is an oversight committee. But, well, I think preservation is important. I do think what Joe said was very relevant, in that there's not a lot of community involvement. And I think I probably would represent another side of the community that typically doesn't get involved in this, because I'm not an environmentalist, and I love the outdoors. I conserve myself, but I'm not an environmentalist. But I think the vast majority of people are like me. They're everyday people going to work every day, and they're seeing government agencies that are expanding all the time, and they feel like they should get something from it. But most people are not even aware of what is going on things like this, I don't think.
Well, and we may be the smallest government agency in California with 1.5 employees in a couple of offices that here in Morgan Hill City Hall. Ed, did you want to talk about the developer versus taxpayer?
Sure. It's roughly 70% of the plan is supposed to be funded by fees on public and private projects. So like a public road or bridge project or a canal maintenance or a housing subdivision or a commercial development. And then the other 30% is supposed to come from grants, primarily from the federal and state government, but there may be opportunities through private foundations also.
Thank you. Then we would move on. Oh, one question before we go further on. Jennifer Shear, has she resigned? Is she going to resign?
Officially has resigned, effective August 6th.
Okay. And what would be the process for tapping someone from the farming/ag community?
Valerie going to go over the process in her presentation.
Okay.
But I contacted Supervisor Wasserman's office. He's the chair of the implementing board, letting him know that Jennifer has resigned and we need someone from the ag community to be, to replace her. And I was at a Farm Bureau event and I mentioned it to the Farm Bureau president, that we need somebody to take Jennifer's place.
And the one member that we don't have here is Dick Oliver, and he is the head man for Dividend Homes, which is responsible in a good way for many of the residences here in Morgan Hill. Then, yeah, go,
Sorry.
jump in.
Ed, so at the Farm Bureau, they didn't let you know whether or not they had an executive director in the chute that they would be hiring soon?
They do.
Okay.
I think she started this week or late last week.
All right, so that's a
Yes.
potential replacement.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Is there any requirement for farm representation? Does it have to be a local farmer, someone just interested in farming? Are there any requirements on that?
Yes, there's supposed to be, I think it is 2 representatives from the agriculture community, I believe. Yeah. So
It actually says farming and ranching community, so it's specific of farming and ranching. Doesn't necessarily say the person has to be a farmer, but it says they have to come from the farming and ranching community.
Okay. Are you accepting, because I have a number of people that might be interested that would be, so are you accepting names or are you already
yes.
working with?
No.
Mariani?
Send me, email me some names. I'll pass them on to Supervisor Wasserman's office. Yeah.
Which brings up a note. I went on the website. You don't have an email on the website. There's no way to contact you, and I don't have that.
Oh, it was supposed to be updated, but I can give you a card. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
It is on the website, but I have to admit, I know, it took me a little while to find it, but I did.
Well, I spent about 15 minutes of
I know, no, you had to get lucky like I did, I think, and
Okay.
finally stumble
That might
over
be
it.
one of the things to let it, so we can easily contact both of you. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I would invite everyone to go on to the website, because websites typically are not user-friendly. And I am technology challenged, but if I can't find stuff on a website, then it's unacceptable because I'm Joe Anybody. And so it's and so if you would go on to the website from the new user standpoint, why can't we find your name easily and your contact information?
It's something that I have brought up, that we've gotten some complaints, and I have brought it up to the consultants, ICF, and to the city of Morgan Hill, who manage our webpage jointly. And I brought it to their attention that some things aren't very easy to find, like staff, and told them that it needs to be a little more upfront and center and transparent and easy to find. So it's being worked on, but I apologize that it's still not done. But yes. Yeah, yes, the graphics are good.
And the phone problems have been resolved?
Yes. We have new phones
And they were just switched over a week early or 2 weeks early?
Yes, yeah, and they're actually great phones. The old ones were not so great, but.
Thank you. Then, do any committee members have any announcements coming up?
Sort of just had a question. I don't know if this is the appropriate time for it. I was wondering if, as I hadn't had a time to look at the plan and get this question answered, so PG&E is doing some right-of-way work, some vegetation management along their transmission lines here. Have they contacted you at all on their plans?
No, they
Okay.
haven't. I don't know if they contacted Ken or Tara, but they have not contacted me.
They had a presentation today for some stakeholders, actually at CAL FIRE right down here on Monterey, and they don't plan on having any take. I found that a little interesting because apparently they're going to do such a great job that won't happen. But I was just wondering if at all they had contacted you to get any feedback on some of their plans.
I do know from my experience in Placer County and working in the planning department, they, being a utility, they have a lot of rules and exceptions that the rest of us don't have, so they may not even have to contact me.
I assume they don't have to. I just wondered if they were sort of decently reaching out to.
But they could become a something we call a PSE, a participating special entity. They're not a co-permittee.
Yeah.
But like Caltrans is doing that with some projects. There was Gavilan College. There was some university research thing through Berkeley, and they all paid fees to get plan coverage. So there may be a time where PG&E will need that.
Yeah, that's why I asked them
and
today,
I know
but they
that
didn't
SMUD
indicate
in
it
Sacramento was working on an HCP, so for their activity. So PG&E may have some sort of.
They don't have an HCP here, not in Santa Clara County now.
Okay.
But I was just curious, just a question. Curious.
Yes.
Thank
No,
you.
it's a good question.
Any others? Then, on the PG&E question, if sometime, before the next meeting or whenever you choose to, that we would like to know if this is a program rather than we got a problem with a tree. Because a program can very definitely have an impact, and I have dealt with PG&E at many different levels, and sometimes they're responsive and often they're not. Since we do have the weight of many elected officials on the governing and implementation board, the agency does have a big club, although they may not have the ability to use it, but there's a lot of heavyweights out there. Go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that the folks at PG&E said they would be specifically reaching out to Supervisor Wasserman's office because they weren't able to attend today's meeting, so they will speak with them.
Good. And then, is there anyone here from the public who has an item that they would like to talk about that is not on the agenda? Gentlemen? Thank you. If I could have a motion to approve the minutes of the May 1 meeting?
Go ahead.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of the May meeting.
Second.
Okay. Is there any discussion or any corrections or questions? And if we could have a vote, yes?
Aye.
I'll have to abstain since I was absent from the last meeting.
Thank you. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4.
I have to abstain also.
So we have 4 yays. Okay. And then the Public Advisory Committee training, is that both of you?
I don't think that's a quorum for the minutes, correct?
Okay, then we will hold off, we will hold it over till the next meeting.
Perfect.
And then if we could, is that Ed or Valerie on the, or both, on the committee training?
So it will be primarily myself. And let me just preface my starting of the training with the fact that it was on the agenda prior to my becoming the general counsel, so I wasn't really sure what all everybody had in mind. When they said that you were going to have a training, I tried to find out, and I put together what I thought would be helpful and appropriate. If you decide at any point you're not interested in a particular topic or you want to know something else, just please let me know.
Thank you.
Right? So, do I operate this or do you operate this? How does this work? I have to operate that? Okay, I got to move. It's all right. It's all right. I'm a little technologically challenged as well. Okay, up or down? Okay, so just some basics about the PAC. Since you're all on it, but as some of you indicated, you're newer than others and so forth and so on. The Habitat Plan actually says that there will be a public advisory committee. So a public advisory committee was formally established. And the Joint Powers Agreement says that the PAC will provide input to the agency regarding the plan implementation, and it requires that the implementation board appoint the members of the PAC. So you're all familiar with having gone through that appointment process. The implementation board formally adopted Resolution 2013-004, and in that resolution they established the PAC, the composition of the PAC, so you all are, either the environmental or general public or whatever your category is. And the resolution specifies that the authority of the PAC is limited to the powers and duties granted by the implementation board, but then goes on to say that the implementation board can change your powers, functions, and duties if it's deemed desirable or consistent with the plan and the JPA agreement. The membership you're aware of is in these different categories. There are 9 members. Basically, it's 2, 2, 2, and 3, the general public one being 3. That's pretty straightforward. There are certain people who are not eligible, or certain categories of people who are not eligible to be on the PAC. This includes the representatives of the local government agencies, the staff of the Habitat Plan permittees, the representatives of the wildlife agencies, the agency staff, and any consultants. The plan has some provisions with regard to the PAC, and the plan says that the Public Advisory Committee can provide input to the governing and implementation boards, the Technical Advisory Committee, and the staff on all aspects of the plan, and then emphasizes 6 enumerated topics. The committee may sunset at the end of the permit term. The permit term is 50 years, so I don't think any of you need to worry about that sunset situation. The topics, according to the plan, that the PAC could potentially provide advice on are fund expenditures for conservation, general application of conditions on covered activities, achieving the biological goals and objectives of the plan, the operation of reserves, monitoring and adaptive management, the technical information and expertise, and adherence to the plan commitments. I think quite a few of you mentioned one or more of these things as areas of your interest. The PAC duties specified in the resolution are a little bit different from what the plan says. Yes?
When you, on the 6 items, topics according to the plan, expenditure of funds for conservation, so we're only to comment on funds that apply to conservation, not general operating funds or anything else?
So let me differentiate between providing advice and any comments that you may have. I think the PAC as an entity certainly can always submit comments to the implementation board or the governing board with regard to any kinds of funding or operational expenses. But as envisioned by the plan, the focus would be the expenditure of funds for conservation. So I don't think you're precluded if you had some real genuine concerns about, say, administrative operational costs, but that's not really the focus of what the PAC is supposed to be focusing on. The implementation board also just looks at the budget. You will look at the budget, but it's the governing board that actually decides the budget. Does that help?
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that distinction, so yeah, thanks.
Well, when the budget was presented, it was presented to us, and several points of discussion that were mentioned here. I then relayed that to during the public hearing on the budget, that this was what the PAC had discussed and had questions about. And so, you know, and it was all received, you know, and no one said, you know, you're out of order, you can't talk about, you know, spending day-to-day money.
That's why I brought it, because that's what we discussed was
Right.
the whole thing. But then it says here, just conservation, and I was kind of thrown off by that. So I understand the distinction you're saying. It's probably not a big deal. I just didn't know if that implied some kind of restriction, which you said it doesn't.
No, I don't believe it does. And the process that the chair described for the previous budget is basically the process you will also be following for the next upcoming budget. There will be a budget workshop. You will have the opportunity to provide input to the implementation board, and then it goes on to the governing board.
Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, wait. So the duties specified in the resolution are that you will host the annual public meeting. And the annual public meeting is something that is required by both the implementation agreement and by the federal regulations. So that is something that is a significant responsibility of the PAC. You also are to consider preliminary reports and recommendations presented by the staff. And then if you are requested to make specific recommendation, or not specific recommendations, but if you're requested to make recommendations on specific items, specific topics, specific issues by either the implementation board or the governing board, you certainly would be doing that.
Well, and a question that if in fact we, the committee, if we, in our infinite wisdom, decide that we want to make a comment about something, we can initiate the comment. Am I correct?
Yes, you can always initiate a comment. The PAC still retains the same rights any citizen has. So any citizen could make a comment at a public meeting. So on behalf of the PAC, the chair or some other designated person can make a comment at a public meeting.
Thank you.
So I have one more question. We do quarterly meetings. Does that count for an annual meeting, or are you talking about a separate annual meeting that's somehow different than what we're doing now?
No, one of your annual meetings, I believe it's the meeting in January. I might have to double check.
Well, they're all open to the public, so
Yeah.
I'm confused. Okay.
I understand that they're all open to the public, but there's a requirement that one be officially designated the annual meeting. And so my recollection is that the meeting in January February is officially designated the annual public meeting. So when that agenda is prepared and when the notice goes out for that, that will clearly state that this is the annual public meeting required by the implementation agreement and federal regulations, as opposed to, for example, this meeting, which is simply your regular quarterly meeting. So it's not that you're going to come to a separate meeting. It's just that that meeting's going to have, for lack of better description, a little more stature. That help?
But we get extra cookies or something that day, or but so okay, it's just a designation. We don't really do anything differently than what we normally do, or do we?
I think there will be kind of like an annual report at that
so
meeting.
we would receive the annual report at that time.
Probably not. No, I don't know what the distinction of the. It's something that Valerie and I are going to learn more about. What as will all of you learn what this annual meeting's all about.
Okay. No, that's
Yeah,
fine.
because the annual report, we in the beginning of the the creation of this agency, it's something that doesn't have to be done immediately, but at some point we have to do an annual, so we get a bit of a kind of a free period here, a free zone where we where the growing pains and et cetera, but yes, at some point there will be an annual report, not in February though, but there will be an annual report and we'll bring it to you, absolutely.
Okay.
I have to learn more about what this special meeting is and when we need to have it.
One quick question about the special meeting. Is it fixed that the February has to be that special meeting? Because we also have new members coming into the board during that February session. We have a new year. If we could move that to May, then we could probably get our hands on the report by that time. I'm sure it's going to go through the other agency parts, and so if we could do it in May, that would probably be more ideal. I know it's a little bit delayed, but could be advantageous for us to have more information, a little more time to process the information.
So the regulation or the rules and regulations that were adopted by the resolution doesn't specify when the annual meeting has to be. And so I may have misspoke when I said that it would be in February. We'll work that out. We've basically just been here a month ourselves, and so we're trying to nail down certain things. So we'll certainly take into account the comments that you've all made about when might be best for the annual meeting and what exactly will happen.
And it also may be something as simple as we elect a chair and a vice chair. And then that might be at that time.
Your first meeting was this past February, correct?
I just go when I get a notice from Angie.
Yes. So yes, I think
This is your third meeting, is my understanding.
Right.
so I do think you are correct about the chair and vice chair for February.
Back to you.
Thank you. So the resolution indicates that there are a variety of areas that the board could make requests of the PAC. And so what I have listed here are the types of requests the board could make, either board, the governing board or the implementation board. So they can ask you to comment on broad policy issues. They can ask you to comment on the key plan implementation strategies. They can ask you to comment on the proposed reserve system and how the assembly strategies and progress is going on that. Any amendments to the habitat plan, the budget, mitigation fee studies and the fees themselves, the annual report, and basically anything else that the implementation board says we would like your input on. So there's pretty much, I think, anything that you could possibly think of in relationship to this whole entity and to the plan are things that one or the other boards could request you to get more involved with. Now, there are some specifics in the resolution about PAC meetings. So the PAC meetings are required to comply with the Ralph M. Brown Act, which is in the government code, and I'll be talking about a little bit later some of the key aspects of the Ralph M. Brown Act. Your meetings are quarterly, the first Thursday of February, May, August, and November, here at 6 p.m. You need 5 members to constitute a quorum, and at least 5 votes for anything except to adjourn. As you noticed tonight with the minutes, you didn't have 5 votes, so you carry that over. You can continue a meeting if for some reason we had this meeting this evening and there was a lot going on and it got late and you didn't want to cut the meeting short and you didn't finish, you could continue the meeting to another point in time. And special meetings can be held if they're called either by the chair or by a majority of the board members. And that's consistent with provisions of the Brown Act as well. Yes?
Do we have 8 members?
You have 2, 4, 6, 9 members.
9. So do we have another vacancy?
No, it just, so you have 8 members, but 9 seats.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So we do have an opening in which category?
Agriculture. It's the Jennifer Shearer.
Okay, so then we're missing Dick, Oliver.
Is Dick stepped down?
No.
Okay.
No.
He's just
Okay.
absent.
Yeah, he's just
I'm
absent.
just trying to count noses.
Then
Okay.
One more.
Kyle Wolf. Okay, yes.
And Kyle represents agriculture.
Yes.
Right.
Good, thank you.
So, there's a chair, there's a vice chair. Each serves a 1-year term at the pleasure of the committee. The chair presides at the meeting, will sign minutes after they're approved. The vice chair basically acts in the chair's absence. And if for some reason both the chair and the vice chair were not able to be present, you would then select for the particular meeting a chair pro tem to preside. The PAC secretary is actually the executive officer of the Habitat Agency. He's designated in the resolution as the one who attends meetings and keeps minutes, although actually the clerk's office representative will actually be doing the detailed minutes. The secretary is also the custodian of all the books and papers and records. Now, because this is a new entity, when it started up, terms were staggered. Some people have 2-year terms, some people have 4-year terms. That was designed to get things up and running. Subsequently, all terms for all members of the committee will be 4-year terms. And you are allowed under this resolution to serve a maximum of 2 consecutive 4-year terms. It also states very specifically that partial terms of less than 4 years don't count towards the limitation, which means those of you who were appointed to a 2-year term actually conceivably could serve for 10 years. Yes?
How do we know what length of time we were appointed for? Because I don't believe I was ever told. Oh, so that's what that means. Good, okay. Should have asked. I thought that meant there were 4 members there.
Okay. All right. The resolution provides that if you have unexcused absences from any 3 consecutive meetings, that's an automatic resignation. It also provides that if you have unexcused absences from any 3 meetings in a 12-month period, that's an automatic resignation. However, it also says that excused absences are absences for personal illness or death of a family member, and family is fairly broadly defined, and that the implementation board can also determine if you had some other absence that was excused for good cause. So unless basically you are really derelict in your duties and don't show up and have no reason to not show up, you're probably not going to wind up with a problem in terms of resignation for unexcused absences. Now, vacancy. Because we do have a vacancy now, we wanted to discuss this. There's a variety of ways in which a vacancy can be created. Death or incapacity, resignation, loss of eligibility, removal, unexcused absence, as we just discussed, inability or refusal to perform your duties, or refusal or neglect to file the oath. When you got appointed, you all had to sign an oath and submit that to the clerk. So you've just had a resignation, so you have a vacancy, and the implementation board as a whole, or the chair of the implementation board, if the board authorizes, will then appoint a successor to the unexpired term. So that's why Ed was talking about people suggesting people who might be candidates, and then that information will go to the implementation board and the chair, and we'll see if the board as a whole wants to make the appointment, or if the implementation board will designate the chair and just leave it to the chair to make the appointment. There's no time period specified in the resolution with regard to when that appointment should be made, but since you only meet quarterly, I would think that there should be an appointment before your next meeting. So your responsibilities as members of the PAC are to prepare and come to the meetings, having read the agenda and any related materials, and to be courteous to the public and other committee members, so that, basically only one person speaks at a time, and you focus on the material before you, and you don't get into arguments with each other or the public. So now we're going to move on from the details of the PAC to some aspects of parliamentary procedure. And I want to stress that the main purpose of parliamentary procedure is to facilitate an orderly meeting. The presiding officer, in this case referred to as the chair, runs the meetings and basically keeps order, is really what it all boils down to.
Question.
Yes.
Was there any discussion or any thought on having a 3-minute, a 5-minute limit, 5-minute limit on speakers?
So that's something that's entirely up to the committee. That's very common at city council meetings, planning commission meetings. So that really is like a local or committee specific rule that you can make, and you can make it across the board for all of your meetings. You can make it as on a case-by-case sort of ad hoc basis. I mean, you don't have a lot of people here tonight, so if somebody spoke for 5 minutes as opposed to 3 minutes, it probably wouldn't matter. But if you had a room full of people, you might very well want to institute a 2 or 3 minute time limit. But that's something that is within the discretion of the committee.
Thank you.
So just some general basics of parliamentary procedure is that everyone is equal, even though there's a chair and a vice chair. When you're dealing with routine aspects of an item, you're all equal members. There has to be a quorum present and majority rules. There are a couple of instances where things require something other than a majority, but basically, typically, if things are moving forward, the majority rules. One issue at a time and one speaker at a time. That's just to avoid chaos. Each item is entitled to full and free discussion. So just because maybe somebody doesn't like a particular item doesn't mean you get to abort it or cut it short or not allow other people to speak on it. Respect the rights of the minority. There are very well maybe times when there's a majority view and there's a minority view, and the minority view has to have the opportunity to be expressed. And silence is regarded as consent. So if somebody doesn't like something, but they don't say anything, there's no way for anybody to know that you don't like something, so silence is considered to be going along with the majority. So just a sample proceeding, if you had an item coming before you, the chair would announce the item. There might be, typically, there would be a staff report and possibly a recommendation. You would then open it for public comment. And like I said, you would state the guidelines for public testimony if you had time limits, and then you would close the public comment or the hearing. Now, there are different types of motions in parliamentary procedure. There's a main motion, which introduces the business that's being considered. There are subsidiary motions, which change or affect how the main motion is handled. So if there was a motion made, and there was a second, and there was a motion on the floor, and somebody wanted to amend the motion or change it in some way, they would voice that amendment. If they were able to get a second, then you would vote on that amendment before you went back to the main motion. There are some things that are called privileged motions, and that's some types of urgent matters that come up and have to be dealt with right away. And then there are incidental motions, which tend primarily to be questions of procedure. My guess is that there's not going to be a lot of instances where you're going to need to get bogged down in this. And even if you aren't accustomed to being in the positions that you are, if you've been to any one of a number of city council meetings or planning commission meetings or other governmental type agency meetings, and you've seen how those meetings are conducted, you probably have some sense of parliamentary procedure, even if you don't consciously think of it in those terms. So main motions are basically motions to approve with conditions, or disapprove an item of business that comes before you. Take from the table means we're not going to deal with something, we're just going to put it aside. Sometimes there are situations, and you probably would not really encounter this, but there are situations where maybe early in the agenda there's a vote on an item, and then there's some other business that comes up later on, and somebody thinks, well, gee, now that we've had this discussion and we've progressed this far, I'd really like to go back and reconsider how I voted on the earlier item. You can do a reconsideration only at the same meeting that you already had that item on. If you have a meeting in August and then you think things over and you come back in November, you can't do a reconsideration. Then you have to move on to the next one, which is a rescind, repeal, or amend something that was previously dealt with. So then I have a list here of the subsidiary motions. I'm not going to go through all of these. The main ones that you would typically deal with would be amending or substituting. And the difference between an amendment and a substitution is, let's say somebody makes a motion and says, I'd like this to be done within 3 days. And somebody else says, well, gee, I'd like to say that it could be done within a week. You're still saying you want the thing to be done. It's just a question of the time. So the amendment would be to amend the amount of time that was involved in getting something done, as opposed to somebody saying, making a motion that they would like something to be done, and somebody else coming back with a substitute motion which says, no, I don't want the thing to be done. It's completely different. It's not just an issue of changing a small aspect of the motion. I don't think we need to go through the rest of them unless somebody really has a burning question about one of them. Then the privileged motions are, as I indicated before, more procedural types of things. So if you want to call for orders of the day, which has to do with how you're conducting business, or raise a question that's again something that's procedural, or say it's 9 o'clock and somebody says, I really want to make sure that we adjourn by 10. That's fix the time to adjourn. Those motions can just be made even though other business is going on. Same with recess, same with adjourn. And then there are these other incidental motions, which again, very rarely come up, but I just thought to be complete in terms of discussing parliamentary procedure, I would lay them out. So, taking action. Once a matter comes before you, someone other than the chair or the presiding officer will make a motion. The motion is going to be approved. The motion could be to approve with conditions. The motion could be to reject, disapprove, whatever. There needs to be a second to that motion. If there's no second, then it doesn't go forward and somebody else has an opportunity to make a motion. Once there's been a motion made and seconded, the presiding officer restates that motion clearly. And then, if the group wants to discuss it or debate it or what have you, that's when that discussion and so forth takes place. And that's when there might be some amendments or what have you. Typically, the person who made the motion is allowed to speak first, and the person who seconded the motion is also allowed to speak next, and then other people may comment or not comment. There's no requirement that everybody talk on every single motion. Some of you may have been to meetings where there'll be a motion made, there'll be a second, the maker will discuss it, the second will discuss it, and then they'll go down the dais and every single member will indicate, how they're going to vote and why they're going to vote and what they think of it. You don't have to do that. You can do that, but it's not certainly required that you do that. Somebody can make a motion, somebody can second it. They can both decide they don't need to discuss it, and everybody can just vote without any commentary whatsoever. If there's a lot of discussion back and forth, and if there are amendments and so forth, and it gets a little confusing, it is up to the presiding officer to restate the motion prior to a vote being taken. And then the vote is taken, and then the results of the vote get announced. Okay, now we're going to move on to the Brown Act. The Brown Act is also known as the California Open Meeting Law. It's in the government code. All governmental entities at the local government level adhere to the Brown Act. The provisions apply to what is defined in the law as legislative bodies. This group does not meet the requirements of legislative bodies as specified in the Brown Act, but the resolution that was adopted specifically says that you will comply with the Brown Act. So as a result, even though you are technically not a legislative body, you are subject to the Brown Act. What that essentially means is that your meetings must be open to the public. There is in the Brown Act a list of exceptions that allow closed sessions. The key exceptions for closed sessions are litigation situations, real estate negotiations, and labor negotiations. It's unlikely that there would ever be a closed session with this body. I can't say 100% that there would never be a closed session with this body, but because you do not have ultimate authority with regard to any litigation against the agency or any real estate negotiations, and there's only one employee, there's the likelihood of your having a closed session is extremely remote. The definition of a meeting under the Brown Act is critical. The definition basically is that there is a majority of members at the same time and place to discuss or deliberate on any matter within their subject matter jurisdiction. typically, for example, when this meeting is over, and let's say you had something substantive on the agenda this evening, you should not then adjourn from this meeting and all go to the local coffee shop and continue to discuss what was on the agenda here. You also are considered to be having a meeting if you use direct communication technology intermediaries, meaning, like a trusted aid, to develop a collective decision on some action to be taken. So if there's an item on the agenda and you start calling each other or emailing each other or faxing or having people go back and forth to talk about the item and come up with your decision beforehand, that's illegal. You're supposed to make your decisions in the public setting such as this, based upon what's presented to you. And specifically, serial meetings are not allowed. And serial meetings are when person 1 talks to person 2, and then person 2 talks to person 3 and says, I talked to person number 1, and he or she is going to vote this way. And then person 3 talks to person 4 and says, I talked to so-and-so who talked to so-and-so, and they said such and such. And one of the things that sometimes becomes tricky, because I don't think most of you would engage in the discussion or the behavior that I just described, but what becomes trickier is if someone who, let's say, has a project that's coming before you and wants to get some sort of read on how you feel about it, and that project applicant or the project opponent comes and speaks to one person and then goes and speaks to another person and says, well, I met with so-and-so, and when I discussed this with so-and-so, they said such and such. And if you ever find yourself in that kind of situation, you basically just need to cut the people off and say, I don't want to know about your discussions with other committee members. Now, there are situations where a majority of you might wind up at the same function, and you don't have to worry about being in violation of the Brown Act. So, if you go to a conference on public agency issues and all of you are there, so let's say you're going to a Santa Clara Valley Water District Board meeting because they're talking about something that relates to the plan and you're interested, but you're going as a member of the public. You're not all going to go and then go off in a corner and discuss Habitat Agency business. You can all be at that conference, or you can all be at that open and public meeting. And the other one is the social or ceremonial occasion, which you can all go to and applaud the ribbon cutting or the groundbreaking or what have you. Now, more nitty-gritty is your agendas have to be posted at least 72 hours before the meeting, and the agendas have to be posted in a location that's accessible to the public. Basically, staff takes care of that, so you don't really need to worry about the mechanics of that. And the agendas have to briefly describe what the business is going to be, and if something's not on an agenda, you can't take action on it. What's really important for the PAC members to understand is if you want to have something on an agenda, you need to let the executive officer know sufficiently in advance so that it can get on the agenda. So you have meetings once a quarter. Don't wait till 3 days before your next meeting to say, I'd like this item to be on the agenda. If you want something to be on the agenda, make sure that the staff knows far enough in advance that you want the item to be on the agenda. Yes.
Where are they publicly noticed now, the meetings?
There's a board right outside this door where we post the agenda, and right outside of this door, and they're on the website.
Okay, but they don't go to each of the agencies that are responsible for, okay.
Is there a reason why the agendas aren't sent to the agencies?
Because we don't hold meetings at their locations. They're not posted there.
I would guess that most of the key agency personnel that are interested in this subject matter just basically look the agenda up online. The law hasn't caught up to technology,
Right.
so the law does not mention anything about online access. The original Brown Act goes back to pre-computer days and focused on the physical posting of the notice at the location. But the reality is and there are provisions, if somebody's really interested and they want to, they can sign up and pay to have stuff mailed to them. And that used to be very common 10, 20 years ago. But now, pretty much everybody looks things up online. So there are some exceptions to the 72-hour agenda requirement. But again, these exceptions are unlikely to apply to this committee because you're probably not going to be dealing with an emergency that affects public health or safety. And there's probably not something that's going to arise between the time that the agenda is posted and the time that you have your meeting. So again, basically, you have close to 3 months between meetings. So if you really want to put something on the agenda, think of it before the month when you get to the meeting. Think of it, within a month and a half of your last meeting as opposed to 2 months. Now, under the Brown Act, the public has a right to speak on any item that's on the agenda. Some places require people to speak on the items all up front, which has never made a lot of sense to me. Most places have people speak on the item as it comes up. That's separate from the public having a right to speak on the non-agenda items that are within the committee's authority. So you had earlier tonight the option for members of the public to speak on something nobody indicated an interest in speaking. If somebody wishes, they could actually come up and comment on this presentation since it's on the agenda, even though it's not an action item before you. As we've mentioned a couple of times, you can impose time limits on public testimony. That can be done in a variety of ways. So you can impose a total time limit, you can impose a time limit per speaker, you can impose both a time limit per speaker and a total time limit. You can request that people sign in and identify themselves to facilitate the minutes and the overall process, but you can't say a person cannot speak if they don't identify themselves. And if there are materials distributed, people have a right to obtain copies of any of those materials. And sometimes that becomes a little bit complicated if a member of the public comes and the member of the public only has a limited number of copies and somebody else wants to get a copy, but there's an opportunity then for the clerk or whoever to subsequently make copies and get them to people. So now we'll move on to the Public Records Act. The Public Records Act is also in the Government Code. The purpose of the Public Records Act is to give the public access to information concerning the conduct of the people's business. And the law says that access to such information is a fundamental and necessary right of every person. The public has a right to inspect and obtain copies of public records. We have the ability to charge for that. Everything doesn't have to be given out for free, so we can charge for the cost of duplicating records. It's a disclosure law. It's not a retention law. So there are completely different laws about how long records have to be kept. And we're not going to go into a discussion of that tonight. But basically, the Public Records Act is to make sure that people have the ability to know what's going on and to follow the activities of the entity. So a public record is, as defined in the government code, any writing containing information related to the conduct of the public agency's business that's prepared, owned, used, or retained. And those are the 4 key words. So if somebody comes to a meeting and says, I have a document here that's, a study by X, Y, and Z, and X, Y, and Z is not something that was commissioned by the entity, and the person does not submit a copy, next week somebody can't come and say, well, so-and-so waived a copy, and so therefore I want a copy of it. If the agency doesn't have it, we don't have it. But generally, the definition is very broad, so it's not just hard copy pieces of paper. It applies to photographs, it applies to emails, it applies to maps, it applies to financial data that's all numeric. There are certain things that can be exempted, and there's specific provisions that allow the redaction of certain things. But generally speaking, if somebody wants to come and look at the records in the office during our regular office hours, they're entitled to do that. One note is that there's no requirement that the Habitat Agency create a document that doesn't exist. So if somebody says, I would really like a compilation of X, Y, and Z, and there is not a pre-existing compilation of X, Y, and Z, we don't have to compile that in the format that was asked for. So that brings me to the end of what I prepared. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. If there's any other things that I didn't touch on that you would like to discuss, I'm happy to address that as well.
I have a couple, but did the gentleman in back, did you have a question?
Yeah, public comment.
Could you come forward and
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, committee members and staff. For the record, my name is Doug Muirhead. I live in Morgan Hill. I wanted to comment on the Chair's question about amount of time for public comment. I have, on occasion, made public comment at other board and committee meetings. Especially at the county level, they keep changing the amount of time, and so if I try and prepare what I think will be an understandable statement, and it's going to take me 3 minutes, and I arrive at the meeting and the chair has decided he only wants to use 2 minutes tonight, or maybe it was 2 minutes and it's gone down to 1, that really creates a problem. So I would request that you establish a default time and put it in the agenda so that people have some expectation of what they'll be allowed to use, and then they can craft their arguments that way. I personally think 3 minutes is about right to either provide a statement and some supporting evidence, or perhaps try and do a little education, something along that line. But it's really disruptive to not know in advance. Now, you still have the option, of course, based on the amount of work you're trying to accomplish that night and the number of people who want to talk to you, to change that. But I really would urge you to establish a reasonable amount of time as a default and put it in the agenda so that people know what they're likely to get. Thank you.
Thank you. For committee members, any questions, comments, other?
No,
It's your turn to go first, Craig.
I'm older than you, so I get to go first. You didn't touch on conflict of interest, which is typically a legal thing that's always brought up. So, I mean, I've served on enough committees and done things, I know generally that, but how is it to be handled here? Do we go to the chair? Do we go to the legal? Do we go to the executive officer if there is a potential issue?
Okay, so let me preface, conflict of interest can arise in a couple of different ways. I believe you all filed a Form 700, and that's probably the major thing that you would have to wind up doing. It could be that in conjunction with something that you included in response to the agency's conflict of interest code, that at a particular item comes up, you would have to recuse yourself. If you have to recuse yourself from that item, you actually are supposed to not only leave the area up here, but you're supposed to leave the room. And if there's a situation where it's clear cut and you know that and you don't have any questions, that's great. If you have questions, then it would be appropriate to ask me first and foremost, and I'll give a card to all of you this evening so you have my email address and whatnot. I cannot, as the general counsel, sort of like give you absolution on a conflict situation. The Fair Political Practices Commission has made it real clear that the only entity that can say definitively it's okay, you can go ahead and vote on something, is the Fair Political Practices Commission. So my advice to you would probably be more conservative and say step down and don't participate. If there's something that is going to come up in the future and you really want a definitive answer on it, then we need to get that data, get the information, be able to describe the situation in a letter and send that off to the FPPC and request that they provide written advice. If they provide a written advice letter that says it's okay for you to vote, then it's okay for you to vote. But
how many years does that process take? I mean, I'm sure it's not a rapid turnaround.
It doesn't take years, but it can take months. However, we do the best that we can in terms of analyzing situations. One thing is you don't have definitive decision-making authority with regard to projects. You have advice and input with regard to projects. So it may not be as difficult for you to not participate as a member of the board on something. Am I answering your question satisfactorily?
The only other thing is a conversation, because I do have potential conflicts of interest.
Sure.
They're not there now, and they may not be. But is that something that has to be done in a public meeting discussion, or can I talk with you offline?
No.
That's my other part.
So if there's an item on agenda, or even if there's not an item on the agenda, that probably within the next 6 months such and such is going to be coming before the PAC, and you have some sort of involvement or role or position or financial interest that could potentially trigger a conflict of interest, then what you would do is you would contact me. You could contact me by email, by phone. You could come and meet with me, what have you. You would explain what the situation was. I would look at the provisions of the law, the provisions of the regulations, which is there's a statutory law and there's a bunch of regulations that have been promulgated. And then there also are all these letters that the FPPC has written with regard to similar types of things. And I would then tell you, the law says you can't do this, or the law isn't clear, but the regulations have this example which seems to be akin to your situation, or, well, the law doesn't really address it and the regulations don't really address it, but there was this letter 2 years ago to somebody that seems parallel, and so forth and so on. That's not something you do in the public. That's something we do offline, because we really need to know when you come to this meeting whether or not you should be participating. And if you shouldn't be participating, as I said before, not only are you supposed to step down, but you're supposed to leave the room. So we don't want to have this discussion, and I wouldn't have the ability to research stuff right at that moment.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay, I had two, but I think I'm down to one since I can't remember what the other one was now. One of them was dealing with, where was it here? We were talking about being able to reconsider, and you said that is at the same meeting. So is that any time within the same meeting?
Yes. So basically, let's say you had 6 items on the agenda, and the first item came, you voted on that, and then when you got to item number 5, that triggered something in your head which made you think that, gee, I think we need to go back and look at item number 1. So in order to go back and reconsider an item, the person who, you had to have voted in the majority on the item. And if you voted in the majority on the item, then you could request that it be reconsidered. And if you didn't do anything at that meeting and you went, down the road, then it would have to be a rescind or it's just a change in terms and so forth.
Thanks for that clarification. And I can't remember what my other question is, so I'm going to have to forego it. Thank you.
Well, the clock is ticking. Any other questions?
Oh,
When I talked about the Public Records Act, often there are, for instance, like with councils, they'll all have a council email. So for here, it's just if somebody was requesting email, that would be just the agency's email. That would not be, because we're running all on private email here.
That's a very good question. So first of all, we might want to actually look into having an agency email, and I'll discuss this with Ed. Right now, the state of the law is that your private emails are not agency business. If you get an email that's related to agency business and you forward it to Ed or to myself or to the administrative assistant, then it becomes part of our stuff, and it's a public record. There was a case out of the city of San Jose about a year ago where this question came up, and the low-level court said even though the email was on someone's private stuff and not on the city stuff, it needed to be disclosed. That creates a lot of problems because we don't necessarily have it, and if you don't have it, it's hard to disclose it. That case went from the Superior Court to the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal said, no, you don't have to disclose those emails. It's not subject to the Public Records Act. That is probably going to be moving forward to the California Supreme Court, so the law on this could or could not change. But as it currently exists, materials related to agency business that are on your private emails and not somehow forwarded to the Habitat Agency are not public records.
But tune in 2 years later and it may change. Other questions?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a couple. On the minutes of voting, are we, do we say, or is it written anywhere where that 6 ayes and 3 nays, who the 6 and 3 are?
Typically, I don't believe so. I think you identify, and you do the minutes, so correct me if I'm wrong, but usually it says the motion is made by so-and-so, seconded by so-and-so, and then it would have the vote, and it would say who voted against, but it doesn't necessarily say everybody, or do you say everybody?
Out this year that now state that we have to vote who the voters were and how they voted.
Okay, so the answer is you'll have all that detail.
Good. And with the agenda packets that come out, and you gave us some very informative stuff tonight. I would ask that this be included in the agenda packets that are made available 72 hours in advance, or even further sometimes, so that we can have the ability to read and reflect ahead of time to ask questions, because this is like the first time seeing something, and I like to read it, put it aside, and then come back, especially on staff reports.
Well, certainly you would on staff reports. We actually debated whether we should do that, but for one, we kept revising the training, so we didn't want to send you something out and then show you something different. And two, because it was a training and you'd have plenty of opportunity to engage in this kind of back and forth discussion. But definitely you will get comprehensive staff reports in advance along with the agenda.
Thank you. And this would be included as part of the orientation for new board members, and probably new, top level staff people as if and when we grow. Then and those were my only questions. So then going back to the gentleman's request for a per speaker time limit, if we were to do that, I would suggest we also do a per item time limit, because I've faced roomfuls of people all talking on the same subject, and you can only hear the same thing. You don't want to hear the same thing 40 times, but that's what it gets reduced to. And so is that something we would agendize, talk about, give staff direction?
Yeah, so again, you could, generally speaking, say that you don't have a time limit unless you have a lot of people. And if you have a lot of people, you could then say, we will generally impose a time limit of 2 or 3 minutes. The gentleman indicated a preference for 3 minutes. Actually, my informal survey up and down the peninsula is kind of split between 2 and 3 minutes, but from personal experience, members of the public seem to react better to 3 minutes than to 2 minutes, especially if people come up and engage in pleasantries. That's half of your 2 minutes. And then you could also say that the total amount of time on an item shall not exceed 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever you think is an appropriate amount of time for an item. So you could, in the portion of your agenda that summarizes the stuff at the back that's kind of the boilerplate, you could have that information there. I I had a thought, and I think I just lost it. So in terms of people getting up and saying the same thing over and over again, a number of people who run meetings on a regular basis at city councils or planning commissions will frequently preface the opening of the public hearing with saying that, especially if there's a lot of people, kind of get a show of hands, how many people are interested in speaking, and then say something to the effect of, we hope that when people come forward, they will provide new information and not just reiterate what someone else has said. If you feel very strongly in agreement with prior speakers, you can simply say, I agree with the prior speakers, and not state everything to try to keep things moving.
And I don't know if we're going to get into that particular arena, but my own opinion is that we should establish a limit for both, and leave it for the chair, the committee to vote to implement it. But
so that could be an agenda item for your November meeting.
Okay. Yeah, because I hadn't thought about someone preparing for the exact 3 minutes, but that makes great sense.
Sure.
Okay. Then, any other questions, comments? Okay.
I kind of want to ask, based kind of on that, is I don't imagine this is ever going to happen, but I'm just kind of curious. So you've got 40 people out there who want to talk, and you're going to give everybody 3 minutes, and you want to set a time limit. Can you do, for balance, can you do, we want people who are pro over here, people who are con, and do it so that it's 1-to-1, so it's a balanced thing?
Well, so what I've seen in some instances is I've seen the chair say, I'd like a show of hands of how many people are in favor of X, how many people are opposed to X, how many people want to comment and they're not necessarily in favor or opposed. And then you could, it's a little hard to orchestrate and say, okay, let's take one on this side and one on that side, because you may not have equal numbers. But you could say, all right, we'll take, everybody on this side first, or we'll take everybody on that side. Or if people have submitted speaker slips, and I apologize, I don't know what the speaker slip looks like, so I don't know what it asks for. But depending upon how people indicate what's something on the speaker slip, there might be a way to divide that. What a lot of places do is they don't worry about whether or not somebody's going to speak for or against, but they take the speaker slips in order, and to try to move things along, they'll say Joe Smith, followed by Mary Jones, followed by Bob Black, so that people are kind of keyed up and ready, and there's not all that downtime between when you call the first person and when you call the second person and how they come up, so it moves a little bit better.
Okay.
So does that make sense for the next agenda? We'll put that as well as speaker cards and what information we would want.
Yes.
And I don't think there's speaker cards for the implementation or governing board, but I mean, I don't think it's going to happen very often, but why not be prepared? And
We're currently in the process of getting some made.
thank you. Okay, anything to sum it up?
No, I just, again, I'm always available. Well, I'm not physically here always, but certainly I'll give you all my card, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have at any time.
Thank you. And then very similar item next with Ed, if you could talk to us, a report from the executive officer.
Yeah, so it's just going to give you a little overview of what I've been doing in my first month. And the agency has no policies either on financial issues or personnel. They didn't even have a payroll system in place when I started. So
But that's the first thing you fixed, huh?
Yeah, thankfully Jill did for me. I wouldn't have had time. I would have been working for free for at least a couple of weeks. Jill took care of all that for me, which was, so we're going through a private payroll firm. So we're in the process of developing a lot of policies related to, the operations of the agency. We're also, the plan doesn't always, like anything, doesn't always read the way it needs to be implemented. So there's some interpretations. Some of them are already on the web. They were developed before I started. We're in the process of developing some others, like allowing applicants to pay their fees early. So we're also looking at changing the timing of when the new fees go into place. Right now it's June 1st, and it doesn't jive with local government budgeting. It's a July 1st fiscal year, and it doesn't flow well with the meetings with this group and the other two boards, so we're looking to change that. And a lot of those sort of, not the fun stuff like buying land and all that, but very important. We also hired a finance accounting firm to develop a fee tracking system for us and to help with the accounting. So they're out of, I believe they're out of Dublin, and they are
Term V tracking?
fee tracking. Sorry,
I'm sorry,
I should have
fee
talked a little
tracking.
clearer
Okay.
into the mic. I'm bending over here. Let me get this up. So there's no accounting finance process. So right now there's an interim finance accounting process. So we got to develop one that's going to keep track of the burrowing owl fees and the wetland fees and et cetera, et cetera. And also will help with all the transparency and openness that you would expect, as well as the governing board would expect, and the wildlife agencies. We're all now tell you a little bit about the fun stuff I have. I can't get into specifics because it's still somewhat on the confidential, but I have visited a few of the sites that are deemed priority acquisition areas by the plan, and I've met with some of our open space partners and taken some field trips. So we're cautiously optimistic that some of these properties that are deemed high priorities for a lot of the species you named in your introductions, maybe we can start acquiring some land. OSA submitted a Section 6 grant that is, once you have one of these plans, you can apply for funding. It's called Section 6 funding. This would be for land acquisition. So once you have a permitted plan, you can start getting some money. And this helps with that 30% of financing the plan that isn't covered by mitigation fees. And OSA submitted a grant before I started with Section 6, and we should know in the next month or so, a month or two, whether we've got the $2 million. And that would go towards purchasing one of the properties that some of you may be aware of, but I can't get into specifics. And some of these things may be in the future where it's deemed necessary to brief you on some of this stuff. We could go closed session and talk about some of the real estate stuff.
Can you put that on the agenda? Or how do you said maybe we can do this in the future? So
oh yeah,
can we nail that down?
once I start getting more information from some of these properties, it'd be something on the agenda that would be, okay. This would be a closed session item to discuss. Yeah, sorry, I didn't understand. Yeah, or not. So also took a tour of the North County. I think Jan mentioned that burrowing owl is very dear to his heart. So went out to some of the sites where there's some of the within the city where there are. I'm glad to say the population has more than doubled on those lands that are being managed by the San Jose utility and district. Ken Davies is taking the lead on that for the city and working with a lot of different conservation partners. But from what he told me, there were 17 burrowing owls. Now it's, I think, over 40 on this particular parcel. And talked to this group about some of the challenges with implementing the burrowing owl strategy within the plan. And I can get into that. If the members would like, I can have Troy come here and give a presentation to you on that particular issue, or I can. And also, there's a subgroup that's been formed to develop a process for restoration of aquatic waters, so like riparian areas, wetlands, and we're developing a process to prioritize sites and try to streamline the process. And because not all the permits are currently covered by the plan, there's still 401, which is through the regional water quality boards, is not part of the one-stop shopping of getting your permits. And then also the 404 permit is currently not covered by this plan, or the 1600, which is through the state Fish and Wildlife Service. So we're in the process of trying to integrate at least some of the 404 impacts, smaller impacts, into the plan, but that's a work in progress, and we're in negotiations with the Corps on that. So also anything related to fish is not covered by the plan. So they were a casualty of a species dropped early in the process. And that's all I really have to say, but I'd be glad to answer any questions from any of you.
So when you were talking about the Corps and the 404 process, so refresh my memory, I cannot recall. We have yet to complete the regional general permit process with them and get to that agreement, correct?
Correct. And unfortunately, the staff person at the Corps who was helping us through the process has left the Corps.
Okay.
And it's a problem. You probably hear this. It'll be a bit of a broken record, unfortunately, but because of what goes on in Washington affects us. The office in San Francisco used to have 10 staff people. Now they're down to 4. So we've been assigned another person to help us with our RGP application. But that person is, I think, a manager and also overworked. So we were hoping to get an RGP done this year, where we'd get a permit to allow impacts to small, like under a half acre for a wetland, or 300 linear feet or less to a riparian area. So it would help with small landowners. It would help with projects like putting in a bridge for public works departments. But it's kind of stalled a little bit. And it's now at a point where we need the Corps to do a lot of the reviews of the application. Our consultant has done a great job up to this point, but now there's a decision-making process where we need them to be more engaged and to provide feedback. And we've raised this concern to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they're going to talk to the Corps about it for us, and hopefully there won't be too much of a delay. Because certainly it'd be nice to have the RGP, because it helps out a lot with, if all you're doing is putting a culvert in, that's not much of an impact, and it'd be nice if you could go through this process, or if you're doing a bridge project. And it would also allow the fees to be targeted towards projects that are priority, restoration projects and preservation projects that are priority for the plan.
Other? Go ahead.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. One was, our first couple of meetings, we had a representative from ICF or Jones and Stokes.
Yes.
Stokes, I forget. Is that going to be typical, or are they just going to be here when there's something specific on the agenda?
Yeah, it'll probably be what agenda specific, being the parliamentary Brown Act training, I told Tara not to worry about coming tonight.
All right.
But let's say it's something, or there's something that you want to talk about that requires one of their staff members to come here and update you on a particular issue. We can also do that too.
Okay, thanks. I just also wanted to reiterate regarding the Berwyn owl. I mean, the reason this came up in our last meeting was that as part of the budget, the revenue side of the budget discussions, it was clear that there was a lot of permitting going on and that was going to require Berwyn owl fees. But yet the strategy for the Berwyn owl kind of came in kind of late into the plan. But we're kind of already permitting take. So I don't know whether the governing bodies have been looking at the conservation strategies or whether they're kind of looking primarily at the financial side. But I feel like in the case of the Berwyn owl specifically, I think one of those bodies, and maybe this is the appropriate one, should kind of be up to date on what's going on with the Berwyn owl strategy in general, and kind of what the plans are. Because I'm sure, given that it came out so late, it also wouldn't surprise me if there was some flexibility involved in there that I think we'd all want to just be aware of, kind of what is specifically happening with the implementation.
Yeah, there's two challenges. One is sustaining a population,
Right.
which I'm sure, and like I said, I can get into this more in another meeting, or if you'd like, I could get into it a little bit tonight. So, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but right now there's about 70 individuals within the county, and I think we got to have triple that number to have a sustainable population. We have about 10 years to do it. It involves working with non-participating cities, either through us cajoling them or them being good neighbors and participating in it. And it involves working out of county in the Bill Evans Wildlife Reserve area, and it involves working within the county, outside the plan area. So the birds are, for whatever reason, not breeding in South County. Historically, from what I've been told, there were birds, burrowing owl pairs in Morgan Hill. I don't know about Gilroy, but the Farm Bureau event a few weeks back that I went to was a barbecue, Castro Valley Ranch, and there was land there with lots of ground squirrels, but no owls. So something's going on. But the land in North County is either outside the plan area, or it's within a non-participating city, or it's the airport, or it's this or it's that. And that's where the birds are. So yeah, it's a real challenge. I don't think anybody would. Well, maybe somebody might deny it, but I would hope not. We have 10 years to sort of figure it out. I think it's going to be one of the major challenges of the plan. Ken had mentioned to me that we're likely to get a lot of the mitigation fees for burrowing owl quickly, but we need to be very frugal in how we spend it, because we need to spend it over 40 years or 45 years versus spend it all within the first 5. So if we buy a bunch of land in South County and the birds never show up, so there's different strategies that may kick into play as we near year 10 and those numbers aren't improving and the birds aren't showing up in South County. So there's different benchmarks that we all need to keep an eye on. Yes.
Yeah, and I think, I just would encourage you to kind of keep us updated.
Sure.
Updated
yeah. And, and I've told you everything I know tonight, but I will keep you abreast and just feel free every meeting to ask me about it. Yeah.
And in general, there's people that know a lot more about this than I do, but it's always been one of the mysteries. Even when there were burn owls reported in the South County, they were very small numbers, even down into San Benito County. So they've always been small, although not zero, but small, even in the presence of what looked like to humanize wonderful opportunities.
Right.
So that's they're
something's
just
going
telling us
on.
something.
Yeah, something's they're okay with overwintering around here, but not nesting. Yeah, and not a burrowing owl expert. I don't know what's going on, but there's something about here they're not comfortable with. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I just want to clarify if I understood you correctly. When you said San Jose had been very successful with the burrowing owl, did you say that there were 17 and now there's 40?
Correct.
In that area?
In that area.
Okay.
And I may have I know it was 17. I think it's over 40 now. It might be 39 or.
And what was the time span that this happened in?
Pretty recent. Josh back here may know better than I would, but it's over the last couple of years that that the population has grown, and it's encouraging, but it's we still got a long way to go to get that sustainable number of what for genetic reasons, to keep a viable population going. Where 70 means over time they will decline and probably go locally extinct, but if you increase it to over 200, that gives them a fighting chance to survive and thrive. Yeah.
Okay.
Other questions of Ed? Then if we could move on to the next item. Oh, yes, of course. Our Birdman.
Yes. So my name's Joshua McCluskey. I'm with Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society, and I just want to clear up a couple things. So the number of raptors at San Jose, it is 40, but that's with juveniles. So you need to take into consideration that raptors have a super high attrition rate the first year. So the number of adults right now stands at, I believe, 15. So next year, as far as the plan is concerned, you only count adults. So it's looking at number of adults per year, and it requires a three adults per year increase outside of those areas. So San Jose, the water pollution control plant, our regional wastewater facility, that population isn't counted for the HCP purposes, same as the airport and shoreline. So those owls aren't counted towards that 3 increase. Those have to be done on separate lands. And then as far as what our concern is mainly right now as member Hintermeister brought up, is there's a lot of permitting going on and the lands are lost. The plan calls for sort of a look ahead replacement. So as things look, the forecast says they're going to be permitted, those lands will be purchased before the take actually happens. And so that's how the plan kind of describes the owls, how they're supposed to work. They give a 2-year time frame for that initially. So the first 2 years of the plan, they can get up to speed. So that technically the owls, once they have all those fees acquired, the $8 million in the plan, the land should be protected. So the 5,300 acres should be protected. Now we only have a year left before all these permits come through and your 2 years are up. Are those lands going to be there? If it takes 10 years, is the plan viable? So that's what we're very concerned with at this point, and we just want to make sure that you're aware of how we see things and how the actual numbers are told. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Okay, then moving on to future Public Advisory Committee initiated agenda items. We need to add to Ed's workload.
Well, if I may, Jan has asked, and it's been suggested that we do have a burrowing owl presentation, so I would definitely support that occurring.
I think there was, silence was consent.
Okay.
And I think it would be good to kind of review what the strategy is, because I think even for people that run the stakeholder group, a lot of it happened after the stakeholder group stopped meeting.
Yeah, it was
So it'd be good to start with that and then just get status and where
Sure.
And we have another resource in the audience as well, who, your membership, your interest is one of the reasons that it appears as though we're doing something good, or at least not bad. Okay, other items? I have a question on the Open Space Authority. Should we invite them, even though Gilroy is not part of that at this point? Should we, it's not a show and tell, but almost something like that, how that the two agencies can and should and are working together?
You would like someone to come here and give a presentation on sort of,
Well,
or
what's the consensus of the board?
I think it's a good idea. I would like to see open space here and sort of get a better understanding.
I agree, but I would hope that it would be by itself, because it seems to me it would be kind of a long, they would need a lot of time to get for us to get a good concept of how they're working together.
More than half an hour?
My suggestion is, I know you guys are still working out the details of it, and I don't want to jump the gun until you got it worked out.
yes.
So I would say, when you have something that makes sense for us to understand, instead of saying we want it next month, if it's not our next meeting, it would make sense, because I mean, I'm familiar with both organizations, and that there's still a lot of questions that you guys are trying to figure out. So
Correct.
I would leave it in your ballpark that as soon as those things are worked out, then to come to us, but not to require it to be at next meeting, because I'm not sure they'll be ready.
Yeah, and for the new members, there's lands that are supposed to be enrolled with the plan, and some are open space authority lands and some are county park lands. I think it's slightly under 7,000 or slightly over 7,000 the total, and it's for impacts on it's mitigation for impacts related to projects that they'll be implementing on their land. In addition to that, they're partners with us in trying to fund open space projects, and in addition to that, they'll be working with us to be receiving sites for mitigation dollars to restore wetlands and stock ponds and all that sort of stuff. And we may be contracting with some of these agencies to help with management of our reserve lands as we acquire them. But Craig is right; it's a working process, and one of the things I'm going to look into is when are these lands going to be enrolled, and maybe when I get a better answer on that, either me or somebody from Parks or Open Space District could come and Open Space Authority could come and speak to you. Yes.
Yeah, and the first time we talk about that, I'd suggest something similar to the Berwyn Owl presentation report. Is land is kind of, that's something that's sexy and interesting to everybody, but the agreements that were made with county parks and Open Space Authority probably just be good to kind of review the discussion of new land versus land that's already in the public domain that's being transferred into the habitat conservation area, just to kind of again make sure everyone's on the same kind of page with respect to what the agreements were.
We can't count the land twice?
Only once, but it is kind of, it's always, I know even with the stakeholder group, it was always kind of a point of confusion.
Sure.
So it's good to just review that again.
Yes, it's common with these plans that land that was already bought is used as help with the stay ahead and jumpstart and all those sort of things. These are a little different too, because there is a offset for future projects of those, both the county and the OSA.
And then also for the future, if this item could be a standing item in the agendas, because it just triggers, what else is out there that we may have heard about, have a question, and it doesn't have to be a full presentation by any stretch.
So standing item
As in future public advisory committee initiated agenda items.
Yes, that'll be a standing item. Yes, definitely. Do you want this just sort of an item to talk about this issue too, related to land enrollment and stuff? Okay.
Yeah, and I'm also sensitive to you being the new guy on the block, is that, I mean, your learning curve is going up like this, and I don't want to, you know, burden you. But at the same time, that sounds as though that would be something you would want to know anyway.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And then share with us.
Yes, no, as I find out stuff, I'm definitely going to share it with you. Yep.
So do we have any other items? Then
I'd like to add one thing.
okay, go ahead.
So just in the sense with open space, I think that we should probably also include the other groups within our respective jurisdictions, whether it's general public or environmental or business development. I don't think it's fair to include one agency entity and not open that up to all. So I think farm also has a stake in this, and business development as well. So if we're going to open up and extend ourselves to one agency, I think we should also be fair and maybe do it to all.
That's a good idea. Okay. Then before I entertain a motion for adjournment, just want to note that our next meeting is going to be November 6th, 2014, 6 o'clock here. And so please put that on your calendars. And do we have anything else to say? Then if I could have a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay. Everyone agree?
Thanks, Walt.